Hollywood star Robert Niro shocked viewers when he went after President Trump on live TV, calling him dumb, but Vice President JD Vance wasn't about to let it slide. In a fiery, unexpected moment, he pushed back and tore apart Niro's rant, something no one in the studio saw coming. It started like any other late-night show: bright lights, a cheerful crowd, and a smiling host ready for laughs. The guest of honor was Robert Niro, a Hollywood legend. The topic was America's cultural divide, but things quickly took a sharp turn. Leaning into the mic, ice cold, Niro declared, "Trump is the dumbest person ever to sit in the Oval Office." The crowd gasped, some clapped nervously, thinking it was a joke, but it wasn't. He kept firing insults, calling Trump a hustler, a playboy, a tyrant, a disgrace. Backstage, Vice President Vance, waiting for his own interview, watched with clenched fists. To him, these weren't just cheap shots. They were an attack on the leader he served and the country he loved. Right then, he decided he wouldn't stay silent. The host tried to keep control, but Niro raged on. He should resign right now. He's destroying the country, and everyone knows it. That's when JD Vance walked onto the stage unannounced. The audience gasped, cameras split the screen. Niro on one side, red with anger, Vance on the other, calm and steady, like a soldier entering battle. The host fumbled, "Vice President Vance, we were just, wrapping up." Vance raised a hand politely, "No need to stop. I just came out a little early." Something Mr. Niro said hit a nerve. The room went quiet. Niro sneered, "Here to defend your boss, that tyrant?" Vance didn't flinch. He stepped closer. "I used to admire you, Mr. Niro. I remember watching The Godfather Part 2 with my dad. You were a hero. But somewhere along the way, you traded that legacy for cheap applause." The audience froze. Even the host was silent. Vance's voice stayed sharp. "You're not mad because Trump failed. You're mad because he succeeded without Hollywood's approval." Niro tried to cut in, but Vance pressed forward. "You call Trump a hustler, but what about you? You built your fortune pretending to be tough guys on screen, and now you act like you speak for everyday Americans." The crowd shifted, unsure who to side with. Vance took a breath, then delivered the line that hit hardest. "You're suffering from something very real, an incurable case of Trump derangement syndrome. Your hatred has blinded you from seeing what he's actually done for this country." Niro narrowed his eyes, searching for a comeback. Vance leaned in just enough. "I used to be a fan," he said, "but when Trump put America first, when he deported the illegals brought in under Biden to protect American families, you called it tyranny. That's when I realized something." He turned toward the camera. "This isn't about Trump. It's about Hollywood elites who can't stand that the American people finally have their own voice." The room fell silent. The tension was heavy, the audience barely breathing as Vance stood firm against one of the most famous actors alive. For once, Niro wasn't met with applause. He was confronted with truth. "You don't speak for working-class Americans," Vance continued, calm but cutting. "You live behind gates, fly private, and shout from your mansion while real families suffer under the policies you cheer for." Niro crossed his arms, forcing a laugh. "Don't turn this into politics. I have a right to say what I think." Vance nodded. "You do, and I have a right to answer. The American people have a right to know the truth." The host, caught in the middle, tried to intervene. "Maybe we should take a break." "No," Vance cut in. "No," Vance said firmly. "America's had too many breaks, too much silence. Not anymore." The audience began clapping, hesitant at first, then louder. Viewers at home leaned in. For the first time, JD Vance wasn't just the vice president. He was a voice people hadn't heard in years. Turning back to Niro, his tone softened, not to spare him, but to speak honestly. "I used to be one of your biggest fans. My mom worked 2 jobs so we could afford movie nights. We watched Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, all of it. You weren't just an actor. You were part of our home." The room fell still. "But you changed," Vance continued, heavier now. "Not because you grew, but because you let hatred consume you. You insult our president not for failing, but for winning without your blessing. For the first time, Niro had no reply. Vance looked directly into the camera. Robert Niro lost me as a fan the moment he mocked a president fighting to bring back jobs, to deport criminals, and to protect American families. You don't have to like Trump, but you don't get to call him a tyrant for doing what weak men won't. Somewhere in Ohio, an elderly woman watching began to cry. Someone had finally stood up and refused to back down. Vance stepped to the center of the stage. The studio was silent, cameras locked on him. "You know why you're upset, Mr. Niro?" he asked. "Because under Biden, your world was untouched. Open borders? You didn't care. Foreign studios flooding Hollywood? You were fine." He paused, then added, "But under Trump, we put America first. Illegals flown in under Biden's chaos are being deported. American jobs are coming back. And Hollywood is finally being held accountable with a 100% tariff on foreign-made films." The crowd stirred. Vance's voice trembled slightly. "You once acted like a patriot, but now you read from the deep state's script. You traded courage for clout, legacy for lies. You became woke." The word hung in the air. Niro's face reddened, but he stayed silent. "You had a gift," Vance went on, eyes glistening. "But you used it to divide, to poison truth. Worst of all, you let hate define your final chapters." A stagehand wiped away a tear. The audience didn't cheer, they simply felt the weight of it. What was meant to be light entertainment had turned into something raw and unshakable. In the back row, a teenage boy whispered, "Mom, is that true about the tariffs?" "About the illegals," she nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, it is." On stage, Niro forced a laugh. "You can wave the patriot card all day, but this isn't about politics, it's about character. Trump's a fool." Vance didn't snap back. His tone was steady, almost heavy. "I've sat in rooms reviewing real threats against our people. Drugs flooding in, gangs planted by cartels. Do you know how many Americans have been buried because of Biden's open border? Try telling those grieving mothers that Trump is the problem." A woman in the audience began to sob quietly. She had lost her son to fentanyl the year before. This wasn't entertainment anymore, this was heartbreak. And JD Vance had just cut through Hollywood's illusion with compassion and grit. He stepped closer to the front row and locked eyes with a gray-haired man wearing a Vietnam. Vance's eyes locked on a gray-haired man in the front row wearing a Vietnam veteran hat. His voice cracked. "You know what hurts the most? When people who never wore a uniform, never stood opposed, never saluted a flag, sit in plush studios and call patriots tyrants." He turned back to Niro. "You never fought for this country. But Trump did, not with a gun, but with courage. He stood up to globalists, to Hollywood, to media giants who hated him before he even took office." The studio went silent. "I remember my grandfather crying the night Trump imposed the first tariff," Vance said softly. "Finally, he told me, someone remembers us." The tears in Vance's eyes weren't for show. They were for the forgotten, the people elites like Niro had written off. "To you, Mr. Niro, Trump's just a punchline. To us, he's hope. For a family in Ohio, he's the reason they have jobs again. For a widow in Texas, he's the reason her daughter doesn't walk past traffickers every day." The audience began to clap, slowly but sincerely. Truth had filled the room. Niro's jaw was tight now, the smirk was gone. "I wish it didn't have to be this way," Vance said, his tone softer. "You were a hero to my generation, you inspired millions. But the day you mocked a president for loving his country, that was the day your legacy cracked." He pressed on. "Hollywood once told American stories. Now it erases them. While Trump was building, you were bashing. While he was protecting jobs, you were raising money to tear him down." Niro folded his arms, silent. "You've gone woke," Vance said, his voice heavy. "And you've let bitterness define your final act. That's what breaks my heart the most." A woman in the audience wept openly. A crew member whispered, "He's right. I used to love Niro. Now I don't even recognize him." Vance turned to the camera, firm but heartfelt. "You can't heal a nation by tearing down its protectors. You can't build unity on a foundation of hate." Across the country, millions were glued to their screens. The studio felt frozen in time. Even the host, famous for dodging conflict, sat stiff and silent. Knowing this wasn't just late-night TV anymore. This was history unfolding live. Niro no longer looked like the icon he once was. His pride seemed to wither under the weight of truth. Vance turned toward the camera, his voice low. "I don't hate you, Mr. Niro. I pity you." Somewhere along the way, you stopped acting and started believing the lies whispered by elites who never cared about this country. The camera zoomed in on Niro's face. He blinked hard, his lips pressed tight. Vance's eyes shifted to a young mother in the audience holding a handmade "Support Our Troops" sign. He pointed. "You see her? That's the real America, not the red carpets. Not the champagne galas, but people who get up every morning, love their families, and fight for a future they can believe in." Across the nation, living rooms fell silent. The camera zoomed in on Niro's face. He blinked hard, his lips pressed tight. Vance's eyes shifted to a young mother in the audience holding a handmade "Support Our Troops" sign. He pointed. "You see her? That's the real America, not the red carpets. Not the champagne galas, but people who get up every morning, love their families, and fight for a future they can believe in." Across the nation, living rooms fell silent. Viewers reached for tissues. This wasn't politics anymore, it was someone speaking for them. In the control room, chaos erupted. Phones rang, sponsors panicked. But the director knew one thing: the world was watching. Back on stage, Vance pressed on. "Mr. Niro, you said Trump should resign because he's the worst man for the job. But I've seen him in the Situation Room. I've seen him speak to the mother of a fallen soldier. I've seen him sign orders at midnight to bring home a missing child." The audience was visibly moved. "You call him a tyrant?" Vance asked. "No tyrant cries in private when a folded flag is handed to a grieving family." Niro shifted uncomfortably, forcing a smile that trembled. "Your movies once united us," Vance continued. "Now your words divide us. And that's not just sad, it's dangerous." A veteran in the second row stood and gave a salute. No one asked him to. The audience turned, awed. It was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning, and Vance was the man holding the mirror. He faced Niro again, gentler now. "Your legacy isn't gone, but it's in danger. Not because of Trump, because of you." Niro blinked rapidly. The tough guy mask had cracked, showing a vulnerability America had never seen. "You let yourself become a weapon," Vance said, his tone firm. "Used by people who hate this country's rebirth. You mocked Trump for making hard choices," Vance said, "but you cheered when Biden let strangers cross our border with no ID, unchecked." A murmur rippled through the audience. "You hate America first because it doesn't put you first. The real Americans love it because for once, it puts them first." At that moment, screens in Times Square lit up with the live feed. Crowds stopped in the rain to watch. Vance looked into the camera one last time. Hollywood told America who their heroes were. Today, the people choose their own. He walked off stage not to applause, but to something stronger: respect. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Clips of the clash flooded social media. Hashtags blazed across every platform. Millions commented. Some outlets tried to spin it. Vice President Vance bullies actor on air, but it didn't stick. People had seen it live, and they felt something they hadn't in years: pride. In a Pennsylvania diner, a coal miner wept into his coffee. In an Alabama church basement, veterans bowed their heads in prayer. At the White House, President Trump smiled as he watched the replay. "That's my guy," he whispered. Straight truth, no filter in Hollywood silence. For the first time, their voices weren't louder than the people's. JD Vance had pulled back the curtain. Behind it wasn't art or honor, just arrogance. Backstage, Robert De Niro slumped in a leather chair, shaken. A makeup artist offered him water. He didn't take it. He stared at the monitor as it replayed. The crowd's shift, the applause, the salute not for him, but for Vance. "You okay, Mr. De Niro?" someone asked. He muttered, almost to himself, that wasn't supposed to happen. The truth had pierced him not because he lost a debate, but because he felt he had lost the people. On his phone, angry messages poured in, disappointed Vance. A clip of a young boy in Kentucky asking, "Mom, why was that actor so mean to President Trump?" It stung. That boy represented the country De Niro had forgotten. The man who once played men of honor had become the opposite. Deep down, he knew Vance was right, but he'd never admit it. The damage was done. Meanwhile, Vance didn't return straight to DC after the broadcast. He told his driver to take the long way through the city's heart. Past shelters, diners, gas stations, loading docks. He watched a waitress lock up a cafe, a single mom waiting at a bus stop with 3 kids, a janitor mop the floor of a quiet church. These were the people Vance had spoken for on stage, not the elites, not the critics, not Robert De Niro. His phone buzzed, a text from President Trump. "You crushed it." Vance smiled, not out of pride, but because it meant someone had finally stood up, not just for Trump, but alongside him. As the motorcade passed an old steel factory, Vance asked the driver to stop. He stepped out into the freezing wind, staring at the rusted gates. "This," he whispered, "is who we fight for." Under the flickering streetlight, JD Vance didn't feel like a politician. He felt like a soldier, fighting for the soul of America. In Youngstown, Ohio, a retired steelworker named Roger sat frozen in his chair, the glow of the TV flickering on his worn face. His daughter walked in with his grandson. "Dad, you okay?" she asked. Roger wiped a tear he hadn't noticed. "I just never thought I'd live to see someone stand up to those Hollywood bullies." JD said, "Everything I've wanted to scream for years." He looked at his sleeping grandson in his arms. "When I worked the line, we made real things, steel, tools, parts. Then they shipped it all away. Men like me were tossed aside." His daughter nodded quietly. "But tonight," Roger whispered, holding the boy tighter. JD Vance stood up and said, "We still matter, and maybe, just maybe, your generation will get a chance at something better." In thousands of homes like Roger's, hearts were mending. For once, they weren't invisible, they were heard. Inside the West Wing, President Trump replayed the viral moment, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. Barron stood beside him, scrolling through endless reactions. "Sir," an aide said, stepping in. Fox, OA, and even a few CNN analysts are calling it the Vance reversal. Trump grinned. He didn't just reverse it. He flipped the whole script. Picking up his phone, he typed, "JD Vance, true American patriot. Spoke for the heartland, the forgotten, the brave. Couldn't be prouder. That's leadership, America first." Barron smiled. He really was. "Got to De Niro, didn't he?" Trump chuckled. De Niro thought he was the voice of the people. Turns out he's just an echo. The president stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. Vance just made history. And the left doesn't even realize this is the turning point. That same night in Beverly Hills, a glittering dinner of industry elites soured. Directors, producers, actors all gathered to toast a film release. Sat scrolling through clips of JD Vance's takedown. He called him woke on national TV, one producer muttered. And the crowd cheered, added a screenwriter, shaken. A veteran actor pushed back from the table. "We used to stand for the working man. Now we mock him. Maybe we lost touch." The room fell silent. In the corner, a young actress wiped a tear. "I grew up in towns like the ones Vance described. We weren't racists or backward. We just wanted to be heard. I left all that behind. Maybe I shouldn't have." The only sound was a phone replaying Vance's final words. Hollywood had spent decades telling America who their heroes were. But tonight, America chose its own. Something cracked and it would not be easily repaired. In Iowa, a gold-framed photo sat on a mantle. Private Daniel Myers, age 20, smiling in uniform. His mother, Teresa, sat before the television, hands trembling, eyes red. She replayed JD Vance's words about Trump folding flags for fallen soldiers. She broke, because that folded flag sat in her hallway, untouched since the day it was handed to her. Biden had never called, not a letter, just silence. But Trump had called, he had cried with her, and now, JD Vance reminded the world. Teresa sobbed not from sadness, but because for the first time since Daniel's funeral, someone remembered. She posted, "My son died under Biden's chaos. Trump called, Biden didn't, Vance remembers us. Thank you." Her grief became a beacon. Her words went viral. Vance's raw, unscripted moment had lit a fire. Hours later, in a late-night studio, host David Lyle sat alone on stage, watching the raw footage. This wasn't the show he planned. He expected applause, edgy jokes, maybe another viral Dyro quip. Instead, something bigger happened, something real. He rubbed his temples. He was no Trump fan, never had been, but even he couldn't deny it. The room hadn't turned against Dyro, it had turned toward the truth. "David, are we running the rerun tomorrow?" his producer asked. David hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, every word, uncut." That night, he did something rare. He went live on Instagram, staring straight into the lens. "I may not agree with everything JD Vance said," he admitted. "But tonight I saw a man fight for the forgotten, and for once, I didn't feel like a host. I felt like a viewer watching a country wake up. Millions felt it too." Meanwhile, Robert Dyro sat in his Manhattan penthouse, blinds drawn, whiskey untouched. His phone buzzed endlessly, publicists, activists, friends all panicked. But he ignored them, not out of pride, but because he was shaken. He replayed Vance's words for the 5th time. One line echoed like a hammer, "You were a hero to my generation." He had spent decades building his name, his legacy. And in less than 10 minutes, JD Vance had shattered it. On Twitter, the top trend read, "Dyro is no hero." The second, "Thank you, JD." He set his phone down and stared out over a city he no longer recognized. For the first time in years, he said nothing, no interviews, no tweets, just silence. Because deep inside, though he'd never admit it, he knew he had lost the people. And JD Vance, he had become their voice. In the early morning, Dyro paced his empty halls. His reflection in a tall antique mirror stopped him cold. It wasn't the bold, iconic face America once adored. It was something else, something smaller. For the first time, Robert Dyro saw not the legend. He saw the man, and he knew the era had shifted. The man millions once admired now saw only a tired face in the mirror. The Oscars, the sets, the applause, all of it felt hollow. What echoed instead was JD Vance's steady voice. "You traded courage for clout, legacy for lies." Dyro rubbed his gray hair and whispered, "How did I get here?" It wasn't politics anymore, it was truth. And tonight, Vance had spoken it. For the first time in years, Dyro didn't feel untouchable, he felt exposed. He switched on the news. Every major outlet replayed the exchange, not mocking, but praising it. The tide had turned and Dyro was sinking. In Indiana, a bus driver named Alan sat in his parked school bus, staring at his phone. He'd never cared for politics, but Vance's words hit home. His father lost his job years ago. His mother's shop was crushed by imports, and now his own work was threatened by low wages and automation. He didn't want pity. He switched on the news. Every major outlet replayed the exchange, not mocking, but praising it. The tide had turned and Dyro was sinking. In Indiana, a bus driver named Alan sat in his parked school bus, staring at his phone. He'd never cared for politics, but Vance's words hit home. His father lost his job years ago. His mother's shop was crushed by imports, and now his own work was threatened by low wages and automation. He didn't want pity. He wanted hope. Clutching the wheel, he prayed, "God, give that man strength." Don't let them destroy him. Across the country, welders, waitresses, teachers, and truckers whispered the same prayer. To them, Vance wasn't just a politician anymore, he was their fighter. In Texas, a civics teacher named Mrs. Lee stopped her lesson and played the clip. Normally restless teens leaned in when Vance said, "Hollywood used to tell America's story. Now it tries to erase it." The class went silent. A girl asked, "Is he right about illegals hurting small towns?" Mrs. Lee answered gently, "He's talking about chaos and manipulation, not you. He's speaking for towns that lost their voice." A boy whispered, "He actually sounds brave." Another admitted, "My dad cried watching this." Mrs. Lee paused the video. "This is why we study history. Because sometimes someone doesn't read a script, they write it." The bell rang. No one moved. The story wasn't finished. JD Vance had shaken the system, and even the youngest hearts in America felt it. In a Warren Auto Parts factory in Michigan, the morning crew crowded into the break room. The small screen replayed the clip for the 10th time. Vance's words rang out, "You mocked the man fixing the mess you created. That's not courage, it's cowardice dressed as celebrity." Big Joe, a forklift driver who hadn't voted in years, muttered, "That man's got fire." Mason, a welder, nodded. "First one since Reagan who sounds like he knows us." These weren't political junkies, they barely followed the news. But now they couldn't look away. The supervisor turned up the volume. Vance spoke of shuttered steel plants, fentanyl in schools, jobs sent overseas. Some clenched their jaws, others wiped tears for the first time in years. Hope flickered on the factory floor, not from a policy, but from a man. That afternoon, Vance's secretary walked in with a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a letter in faded ink. "Dear Mr. Vance, my husband died protecting our town from the drug wave after Biden's open border. He was a sheriff, a father, a Trump supporter. When you stood up to Niro, I saw him in your words. I cried, not from sadness, but because I felt seen again. Thank you for defending the forgotten, a grateful widow." Vance sat silently, hands shaking, before folding the letter and slipping it into his coat. He knew this was no longer about one speech. He had to carry it. By nightfall, the ripple had become a wave. Talk shows, podcasts, truck radios, TikTok clips, his words spread everywhere. A boy in Kansas filmed himself tearing down a Niro poster. A veteran recorded, "I served overseas. JD Vance served me tonight." Even people who never watched politics replayed his monologue at breakfast. It wasn't just a speech anymore, it was a movement. It felt sacred, full of truth, emotion, and purpose. From ranchers in Texas to welders in Ohio, Americans were whispering the same words. We found our voice again. JD Vance didn't yet realize how far his message had spread. But he would, because America wasn't just listening, it was waking up. The next morning, he stepped into a small radio studio. He hadn't slept, the weight of millions hung on his shoulders. "Mr. Vice President," the host said, leaning forward, "last night was unforgettable. Do you have any last words for Robert Niro?" Vance looked into the mic. "No, I've said all I needed to him." He paused. "But I do have something to say to the American people." Silence filled the studio. "We've been mocked, silenced, told we're backward for loving our country. But we're not. We build, we serve, we sacrifice. And I want every man and woman who feels small in this culture war to know you matter." The phone lines exploded. A mother crying, a farmer thanking him, a Marine saying, "You gave my kids a reason to believe again." Across the nation, JD Vance's name wasn't trending as a politician, but as a patriot. The following day, Niro reluctantly appeared on a news show to defend himself. But when the anchor played Vance's clip, Niro froze. The studio audience didn't cheer. They just stared, some holding signs. "Vance spoke for me. Actors don't own truth. Make America strong again." Suddenly, Niro tore off his mic. "I'm done," he muttered, walking out. The anchor was speechless. In the hallway, a janitor passed him wearing a faded Trump Vance 2024 shirt. No anger, just quiet dignity. For the first time in decades, Robert Niro didn't know what to say. He had lost the room. That night in Pennsylvania, Trump and Vance entered a packed arena. The crowd rose to its feet, cheering, many holding photos of loved ones, lost jobs, or homes, reminders of what they thought was gone forever. Trump raised a hand toward Vance. This man speaks the truth. JD stepped forward, voice shaking. I didn't plan for this moment, but I want to say something to everyone watching. Whether you're in a small town, a big city, or sitting in your living room crying because you finally felt heard, you're not forgotten. You are the soul of this nation, and we will fight for you. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. The arena roared, tears fell, and the media had no choice but to cover it. Authentic patriotism was back. And if this story touched you, if it made you proud, made you think, or even brought a tear to your eyelid, drop a comment with the moment that hit you hardest. Like the video, subscribe for more, and join our community to help keep these stories alive. America is listening again. Don't just watch, be part of The Voice. Story time with Green, where real stories reach real hearts.